Garth Fasano, welcome to the show. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Nick. Thanks for having me.
So you're the president and co-founder of a company called RaYnmaker. What is that?
RaYnmaker is an autonomous sales platform for small businesses. It's been around for over 15 years. And in its history, it was actually a call center doing outsourced sales for small businesses around the United States and Canada. 3 years ago, I acquired the call center through a search process, entrepreneurship through acquisition. And, when I acquired the business in October 2022, I knew technology transformation was coming, but I sort of believed I had 10-ish years. Lo and behold, OpenAI announced ChatGPT in November 2022. And I knew we still had some time, but the opportunity presented itself to do a real technology transformation in the company. And that's where we are today. And we've been going through that transformation this year, and we've launched our autonomous sales platform and really pivoted from a small business, a search fund, to a high growth startup. So it's been a wild ride and a lot of fun.
So I've talked to a lot of folks like yourself recently who did search funds or some type of ETA process. What was going on that led you into doing that? Why did you want to go acquire a business?
My career had been in both technology companies as well as consulting at Deloitte and BCG, always in sort of customer experience, sales and service transformations at scale, which was contact center work. For whenever you're at a Fortune 500 company, customer service is call center, sales is call center in many ways. And so for the B2C companies. So I sort of had a deep expertise in that area, but always felt, a little out of place in the corporate world. I am definitely an entrepreneur. I had a handful of ideas that I started, 0 to 1 ideas, and never felt like I had enough traction to leave my W-2. Part of the problem was I never left my W-2, so I never got enough traction as well. And there was a little bit of like a, maybe hesitancy to take that leap and make that commitment. Once I learned about ETA and knew that you could step into a business that had revenue, had market fit, I was sort of instantly hooked and did a search for about 5 years on the side during my W-2 and, looked at a lot of businesses outside of call center customer experience. When I saw this one hit the market, I knew instantly it was going to be a really exciting opportunity for me.
So you were doing a totally self-funded approach.
Totally self-funded. Yep.
So tell me more. I mean, I think I know what a call center is, but this is the first story I think I've heard of somebody buying a call center as a standalone business.
Yeah. The way to really think about it is an outsourced sales organization. And what that means is we had clients around the US and Canada that hired us to provide the sales team to actually sell for their business. So when I acquired the business, we had 100 dog trainers as customers, and their leads would come to us. Their inbound web inquiries, web forms, their phone calls would come directly into our call center, and our team would communicate their value proposition to their prospects and convert them into customers, take deposits or payments, and then actually book that customer directly on their schedule. So it was an outsourced sales team, which is common in sort of big outsourcing organizations. It can happen, but having worked at some of the big outsourcing organizations out there, I know a couple things are true that were very different about this company. The first was we owned the technology that orchestrated this system. We owned the CRM, we owned the telephony, we owned the local business phone numbers. And that is unheard of in outsourcing. The other thing is that we were really good at sales. Most outsourcers are not good at sales. We are still fantastic at sales, and that's the proprietary IP that is effectively flowing into the AI platform today. And then the third part was that it was all outcome-based contracts. And so that's why we were really good at sales. Like our incentives were aligned with our customers. And so those were 3 very unique things that I saw and instantly knew were not out there in the industry. As you think of like a lot of people talk about red flags to look for when you're buying a search business during due diligence, there were plenty of those, but there were these 3 screaming green flags that said, go to me.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to ask more about. If you're willing to share, when we are searching for a business, there's certain criteria that we're all looking for. What does the economics of a call center look like when you're a searcher and you come across something like this and do your first screen?
Yeah. I mean, I knew economics of call centers pretty well and outsourcers like this. I mean, there's a bunch of public ones, so anyone can go and see this kind of stuff. But for onshore resourcing, which is what this was, we weren't offshoring the sales team to the Philippines. They were remote, dispersed across the United States and full W-2 employees. Margins are typically pretty low, 15%, maybe 20% if you're really cooking. A lot of outsourcers get their margin from offshore resources. Like margins in the Philippines are typically going to be 50+% gross margins. And so I knew that the margin profile wasn't going to be fantastic, but because we did own some of the technology, the margin profile was sort of made up for there. And then also it was sort of the classic small business where there was really zero SG&A other than the owner and everyone was doing stuff. So that kept the margins up a little bit too.
Yep. So did you incorporate SBA financing in this deal?
I did. I funded it with 80% SBA, 5% seller note, and a 15% equity injection. Yeah.
So was that margin profile challenging in securing the SBA financing?
No, it was not. I also love financial modeling. So I built a pretty crazy model for this business and modeled some pretty significant downsides, and it still worked out. I mean, I think that the reason it worked out was that the multiple was relatively low. In the world of search is on the smaller side, and the world of self-funded, probably right in the right spot. But the multiple was pretty low. It was like a 1.8x the 3-year average. And if you look at the 1 year, there was a lot of growth. It was like a 3x the prior calendar year.
Yeah, nice. And it sounds like it was that classic situation where the owner was looking to retire and needed to sell their business.
Yeah, she was actually my age, started the business and was a FIRE follower, financially independent, retire early, and she fired.
Nice. What was your day one like? I always like to hear these stories.
Oh, this is great. Day one was a Saturday. We closed on the business on a Friday, took possession on a Saturday. And the way I think the best way to describe it, that's like when you hear the music stop and the record scratch and you're like, oh shit, I own the business. It's a Saturday. I don't even know how to log into stuff. Like, oh boy, I better get this under control. And this is something I'm really passionate talking about to people because I think in search, there is so much hype about search is this shortcut to making a whole bunch of money. And everyone talks about, well, how do you do a search? Not enough people talk about what it takes to operate a search company. And so that is something I think is really important. And, I got not in a way that caused anything bad to happen, but definitely caught flat-footed because I was so focused on getting the deal done, securing the financing, that I hadn't really prepared my plan for what the first 30 days were going to be like. And I think because I acquired a business in an area that I was very comfortable with, knew a lot about, it wasn't a big deal. But if I had acquired in an industry that was new to me, it would have been wild. It would have been totally crazy. So I actually teach ETA at CU's MBA program here in Boulder, Colorado, with a couple other folks, Shannon Jones and Adam Merkley, who I've seen some of them on your pod as well. And then, I also have a podcast called Bought the Biz, where we talk all about this kind of stuff. Like, what is it really like to operate a search business after the deal closes? So you asked though, day one. Day one was a Saturday. I didn't really know what to do. I probably did my normal thing and went rock climbing with my wife. And Monday, when things started, we did have a plan. Tuesday morning was the sort of leadership Zoom meeting because everyone was remote. So I introduced myself on the Zoom meeting. And then Thursday mornings were the sort of company all hands. So I was introduced by the seller on the company all hands. It was all on Zoom. It was so weird in many ways, like looking back, probably relative to other searchers. Like all of this was done virtually. I met one employee in person that was local in Denver during that first week. He was a key employee. And, that was actually a sort of like tricky transition. He had thought he was going to get the business.
Yeah. So how did that go? Did that person end up sticking around or ultimately going somewhere else?
He is still at the company.
Nice.
And, he and I have talked a lot about this recently. He's actually the seller's younger brother. And we had a whole bunch of conversations during the first couple months. I think what he saw was that something different was about to happen. And, his autonomy and, sort of what he had earned over the 10 years plus that he was at the company. I think he's been there the whole time, like 15 years, actually. I wasn't going to change that. It wasn't like I was going to micromanage him. I wanted him to still be able to do what he was doing. And he had built that trust, and he wasn't like starting from scratch. He and I have talked a handful about some of those key moments. One of them was we did this exercise, like filling out a worksheet of where we thought the company would be in 3, 5, 10 years. We took a hike together and talked all about that. We had dinner with our families, and like I played with his daughter, and he said that was a really pivotal moment. And I think he probably also incredibly importantly, he's seen that the company's on a growth trajectory that would have never happened. And he acknowledges, he would have never done this with the company too. And so this opportunity is so much bigger than what he had realized it might be.
Yeah, that sounds like a tricky situation to navigate.
It is tricky. Yes. Yes. I think one of the things looking back, if I were ever to do a search again and acquire a company, I will not acquire it without meeting the key employees, and I will not acquire it without meeting some of the key customers, which those were on my list, but I negotiated those away in the process. And I think one of the things that's tricky, it was a broker deal. And so I was negotiating with a broker who was negotiating with the seller. I think if we had talked together directly, we would have found a way to make that happen. And, I just didn't know that I probably should have asked for that at the time. Like, hey, this is really important to me. Like, let's all sit down together and talk about this more and figure out a way to make something like this happen. I think essentially I was used as the tool to create the conversation between these siblings. And like, you don't want to be that's not a good situation to be stepping into.
The key employee conversation, that's obvious. If you can have it, you want to do it. The customer one, that's tricky though, right? I mean, I was not able to talk to any customers prior to acquiring this business. And, it's very obvious why sellers would be very hesitant to ever let that happen.
Yeah. I think my pushback would be like, well, if that's such a big deal, like, are they really that solid of customers? And again, it also depends, like, are you a recurring revenue business? Are you a project-based business? So yes, there are some total caveats to that. Business I acquired had long-term customers recurring every month. And I don't think it would have been a big deal to be introduced to the customers in some way or another, like on an account management call or something, like in a way that doesn't say, oh, this is the person who might buy my business. Like there's probably, we can be creative and find a way to do this a little bit better. I just think that something that a searcher is going to do in that process is start to negotiate with themselves on what is really important to them.
Sure.
And everything is a give and take. And so just make sure you're like, this is all going to be on your shoulders the day the deal closes. So make sure you have all those conversations in the right way. That being said, everything worked out fantastically in the acquisition. And, the business is totally transformed now, but basically, essentially almost 2x revenue in the first calendar year, doubling EBITDA, significant growth. Had a thesis that we need to go get some new customers, prove that we could serve additional verticals, expanded into some other larger franchise systems, and then with independent businesses. And, we now have $1 million enterprise deals in the pipeline with big corporate accounts, large franchises. We signed an enterprise deal with a franchise yesterday, and they're all purchasing now a totally autonomous AI sales platform that is essentially replicating the sales motion that was happening in the call center. We can do deep discovery in a sales call. We can ask questions, ask follow-up questions that, a top sales rep would be the only one capable of doing. And then we can pitch the right product, do talk-offs and objection handling, all with AI, take a payment and schedule directly on a calendar. And for small businesses, lead acquisition is sort of the lifeblood of the company, and it's never been handled in a great way. Like, sometimes there's a person at the front desk who might take the call, sometimes might follow up with leads. Maybe it's the owner, but then what happens overnight? What happens on weekends? And these things just slip through the cracks. And now literally you're going to have recursive learning with AI where the best salesperson is on every call instantly, 24/7, 365. And that's a capability small businesses just can't afford in sort of the human labor model.
So is this meant primarily for inbound calls that would come in as opposed to, I am familiar with these, marketing companies, whatever the right term is, where they're doing, like I could hire them to do the outbound prospecting for my company.
Yeah. So what we generally have is when there's a warm lead that comes in, generally they come in through a few different channels. Like let's think for a home services company, like lawn care, pest control, something that's happening in your home. Leads come in through a web form on the website, a direct phone call, a lead aggregator like Thumbtack, Angie's List, Yelp. And so all of those channels can funnel into our platform, and either we'll answer directly the inbound call, or we can outbound dial them and send text messages and follow-ups that way, and then put them through this autonomous sales process.
Talk me through a little bit of this big technology transition where you brought in the AI. I mean, you recognize that this is a opportunity, potentially a risk. Just without knowing the detail yet, it seems like if you got this wrong, it could be really bad.
Yeah, it could be, but it's already working. It's already been in the market. We've had a beta version of the product in the market for basically this entire year. So we've been already collecting on data, how AI voice perform on calls, and the results were surprising. We thought, for example, with the sort of version of the product, we were essentially a fancy voicemail, providing detailed information via the voice, asking questions, taking notes, and not selling, but helping prioritize and score leads. And we thought that, the hang up rate when a human called in and heard this AI voice, we thought the hang up rate would be, we weren't sure, but 30% wouldn't have surprised me. We had hang up rates between 6 to 12%, depending on the vertical. And so we were like, wow, that's really surprising. And here was what was even crazier is someone that would call in would often redial in again and have an 8-minute conversation with the AI. And the conversation was all sorts of questions like, tell me about your service. How does this work? I want you to kill the mosquitoes in my backyard. Like, is it safe? Is my tomato garden okay? Will my dog be okay? Like, you're just asking all these questions. And what's wild is, that information is just not available on a website. Like, websites are designed in small business to funnel you to a lead form or get you to call, basically, if it's a good website. And a lot of that detailed, nuanced questions are not readily available to a consumer. And so today, the way that information is passed back and forth is on a phone call. And it pretty much has to go to a phone call. And that is so expensive for a small business. And it's only getting worse. We actually have a client that recently signed up. They're a home cleaning company in Texas. And, they said, hey, we're getting all these robocalls and we don't really know what's going on. And, we don't have enough staff to answer this stuff. It's getting crazy. And they're like, do you even know what this is? We're like, yeah, we know exactly what it is. Google's AI is calling. And there are options now in Google local search where you can have Google's AI call a small business, get their pricing, get their availability, get information. And it summarizes that from a variety of businesses and sends the consumer a text message or an email so they can make a decision about what to book. So more and more AI is going to be calling small businesses. And this is sort of potentially catastrophic for them. You're paying to be at the top of Google search results. Now you're probably paying to be at this like AI call, find out information from the business. Now you're paying somebody at the front desk to provide that information, and you don't get the lead info. You don't get their name. You don't get their phone number. You don't get their email. And so this is really expensive for a small business. So there's no way within a short period of time, let's just say 12 months, that they're not going to be responding with some AI tools like this. And also there's no way in 12 months that any sort of human-based sales force in this world is doing as well as a technology platform like ours.
Yeah, I want to ask a specific question about something you mentioned in the example of the conversation. Somebody's getting perhaps some pest control services. If you bring on a new client in a totally different industry, in general, how do you train it on all of those nuanced questions and answers that you gave in the pest control example?
Yeah. So in our architecture, we sort of have 4 big layers, pretty sophisticated architecture, but to answer this specific question, there is a sales methodology data architecture. So we know how a sales flow should work on one of these calls. And we have a constitution that says, we're not going to be sleazy. We're going to educate. Like that's part of the DNA in this process. It's not trying to trick or deceive. Then we have industry training that we've already built up. So we know if it's a pest control company, here's how you sell in pest control. If it's a lawn care, we already have that data structure. And then we go to the brand. So then we do specifics for the brand. Like, let's say one brand calls their, in the pest control example, their synthetic product this. They have a, all natural product that they call that. So we can do this brand training as well as the do's and don'ts. And then what we'll also do is a location training, because a lot of these are, well, we do work with independent companies. We also work with larger corporate entities that have multiple locations in multiple states. And so there can be specifics for an individual location, like what zip codes do they service? What is their pricing by zip code? Maybe there's a sales tax in that specific state. Maybe that in a particular state for pest control, they can't use certain products, or there's certain disclaimers that have to be used and things like that.
I obviously don't know anything. I'm just kind of putting pieces together as you describe things. So has your business evolved perhaps from a lot of folks that were answering the phone to now you have a lot of AI developers? Has the business totally changed?
We are in that pivot right now. We are actually closing the call center completely. And so it's going to go from what was people on the phone taking calls and, a couple little back office jobs to an AI development team, a product management team, and a marketing team.
That's what I was trying to get at with my question, and maybe I didn't word it correctly. If you didn't get this transition right, it could be very bad. I wasn't trying to imply anything there, but because you just described, you completely changed the business from when you bought it to something entirely different. And that's a really high risk activity, right?
It is. But at the same time, I am incredibly confident, 98% confidence that the core business was going to disappear within 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
When I bought the business, I felt like I had 10 years. I knew that there's a timeline on when call center type work is going to go away. I knew that in 2015. It was just a matter of time. So when I acquired the business in 2022, I kind of felt like I have a 10-year horizon until this is really disrupted in some way that requires a significant investment. But 10 years, that's a good runway. That's fine. You can figure things out. A year in with the board, I was having a conversation. They would always ask me about AI. And I said 3 to 5 years is the time frame now. We've got AI out here in the marketplace. Things are happening. And then at the 2-year mark in that board meeting, the same question came up. And I said, hey, look, I think it's 3 years. The next week, some of the AI voice capabilities came out. I called the board back and said, hey guys, let's talk about what the options are and what you want to do. He took a very detailed planning exercise of like, hey, this is a fantastic business, solid cash flows. We can probably just run it for, let's say, 3 to 5 years. It's going to continue to decline over that time. And we can just accept that, take the cash out, go build the next business and move on. But we're also really onto something, and someone is going to win in this marketplace. The IP and methodology behind this is incredibly good. It is already a unique business that has the history. Like, we could also turn this into a high growth technology company. And so we had all those discussions, and I had made the decision to use the cash flow from the business to pay down the SBA loan. So we were sort of out of the personal guarantee world at that point already 2 years in. I also think that AI is the opportunity of sort of our generation to do something big and take a big swing. And so this is like, why wouldn't you go for this?
Yeah, it's very impressive as you describe it. I think all of us that run businesses are paying attention to AI and probably get tired of talking about it, but there's a lot of disruption ahead of us.
What's exciting for small businesses and why we're specifically targeting that, not only is that the experience of and the history of the company, but it's much easier to implement this in a small business than an enterprise. And you might be like, but like, it's expensive, it's hard, I don't have any AI developers, what do you mean? But like, my point is that for an enterprise organization to take a platform like us, they already have a CRM. They already have a Salesforce. They have all these processes and workflows. And there's this massive change management process. For the average ETA entrepreneur, like, you might have, sales might be just you. Like, maybe you've got a sales team, maybe you have a CRM, but like, you can build a Zap and integrate all these things like this afternoon. And so the ability to create change in a small business is so much higher, and the need is so much higher in these small businesses, especially as AI tools are adopted by your consumers and the big players that are driving leads to you. So this change is going to happen, and it's going to, I'm talking all about how it's going to affect sales, but it's going to affect small businesses everywhere across the board in so many ways.
I'm sure you're correct. I want to, if you don't mind, I want to just shift and talk about ETA in general just for a few minutes, because you mentioned teaching this at one of the local universities. There's, from my perspective, ETA has evolved a lot in the past couple of years, right? There's like the new fad. It was hold co's 2 years ago, whatever it is. So I'm just curious, what are you seeing these days in terms of how search is evolving?
I think it's getting harder. I think that there's a lot more competition for deals. And I know everyone talks about, well, there's this silver wave, there's going to be all these deals hitting the market. And on a macro level, I agree with that. What I feel like I'm hearing on the ground is that it is becoming harder and harder to find a good company. That being said, I see people doing it all the time. And in our Colorado ETA community, there are successful searchers buying companies every month. So I just think that maybe people need to open the aperture of what they're searching for. And, for example, what I mean by that is I did a very geographic search. I knew I wasn't going to relocate. So that was sort of my big variable. And this is a common framework that people talk about, but there's geography, size, and industry. You can sort of pick one of those as your untouchable, and the other you have to be flexible on. I think people are just going to have to be more and more flexible on these types of things.
And are you seeing folks doing more of the self-funded approach as opposed to traditional? I don't feel like I hear that much about traditional.
Yeah, our Colorado community is a lot more self-funded. We do have some traditional searchers out there, but I think it's by and large self-funded. And I think each of these models have their own place. I mean, I was very afraid to go with a larger deal size. Like the personal guarantee is a really big deal, and I think people need to take that incredibly seriously. But I do think that needs to be balanced against the merit of going for a larger company. Mine was, when I acquired it, had 2 million in revenue. And I think once you're over that 5 or 10 size, you're going to be less talk about buying a job versus buying a business. I bought a business, but I was still pretty hands-on. And so I think you really need to think about where you want to be and how you're going to have the biggest impact. I actually love the size that I bought. I love that I know sort of everything about the business. And I think that was really fun. But, I can also really believe that de-risking the business with a larger size is something that's going to probably be important. If that means you have to do a traditional search to get access to that sort of capital, then that's probably a reasonable thing to consider if you want that larger size.
Well, Garth, what a super interesting story. I could probably talk to you about your business for a couple hours, just because we're in a technology business ourselves. And so just really interested on how stuff works. But is there anything you think I should have asked or something you want to leave as a concluding thought?
Yeah. I mean, I think for the sort of small business owners and operators and CEOs out there, AI is really going to change how we all operate over the next couple of years. Depending on the area, it's really just only a matter of time. And while encourage everyone to sort of make the massive transformation that we did here, I would just sort of leave you with this is the biggest opportunity we are going to have in our time. I'm of the age where when I came out of college, we were in the financial recession, and most of my consulting class was pretty much immediately laid off as that all happened. And I watched people walking out of their offices carrying boxes in Manhattan as things unfolded. And so we sort of missed a bunch of significant opportunities the .com era. And then we got hit by this, and this is our opportunity to take a big swing. And so I would say, if that's your aptitude, this is the moment. Go for it.
That's great. And just tell folks how they can find you and your company RaYnmaker, because it's spelled differently.
RaYnmaker.ai. You can find us online there. And I'm on X at Garth Fasano and LinkedIn. Yeah, I would love to chat about AI or technology and small business sales anytime.
That's awesome, Garth. I really appreciate you spending time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Nick.